Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm really excited for our guest today. We're going to be talking about the 4-day work week, and I'm going to say it now because I almost said it during pre-recording, was the 4-hour work week, but that is Tim Ferriss's book. No, we are here to talk about the 4-day work week, and with me for this conversation today is Morganne August, and I have to look at my notes because I'm going to forget it right away. I apologize, Morgan. Director of People Operations at Gear, and who rolled out a 4-day work week 2 years ago. And so I wanted to bring you on today. When I heard about this, mutual connection of ours put us in touch and was like, you got to talk to Morgan. They did the 4-day work week. You know, it's a great story. You should hear about it. And so glad that you agreed to come on the podcast today and tell us all about it.
Yeah. Thanks, Kent, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah.
Just like you say, you might say the 4-hour work week. I might say web strategies because we just recently rebranded to Gear. So forgive me if I do that. Our company's name is Gear.
Perfect. Thank you. And before we get into the topic, I just think people like to hear, especially any sort of early or even curious mid-career professionals out there that get to hear these interviews, would just love to hear as much of your sort of career arc, career story leading up to today as you're willing to get into. So would love to hear about your hero's journey.
Yeah, sure. If there's anything I've learned listening to your podcast so far, it's that most HR professionals did not start there. Mm-hmm. They fell into it.
Yeah.
So same for me. I went to school. I got my bachelor's in English and my master's in secondary education. So I was a middle and high school English teacher.
That makes
loved
perfect
the
sense.
kids.
Yeah.
It does. Loved the kids. Loved finding new and creative ways to teach. Loved making connections. Always had a hard time with administration. Mm-hmm. I just didn't feel like teachers had the framework and the support they needed to succeed.
Yeah.
But I also knew that I didn't want to go into administration or policy. Mm-hmm. So if I wasn't going to help be the change, then I needed to get out because I was just going to be bitter and resentful. I played around for a little bit. I went back to school and got a master's in English for fun, I guess. My poor husband. And then I fell into a startup here in town and into sort of a catch-all marketing role. And what drew me to the startup was their mission. They had set out to help folks who were in difficult living transitions, in between difficult living transitions. So that could mean cleaning out a loved one's house after they passed. That could mean moving an elderly relative into assisted living. And I'd lost my dad just a couple years prior. So that was something that was like very fresh to me still. And I've always been, pretty mission motivated. So fell into that. Didn't love the marketing aspect, but I did love the startup part. I liked the fast pace. I liked all of the learnings. We learned about mergers and acquisitions and all these things that, usually at 24, you're not getting to experience yet. And I also met my current CEO and company there. We were their client at that time. So that's when this first seed was planted. Spent a little bit more time in a different startup. This is all COVID era. And so also trying to have young kids, which was very difficult to do at a time when you're also trying to grow your career. But it also highlighted for me, how inextricably connected our work lives and our personal lives are. And it was always very obvious to me when the proper framework and proper supports were in place for people to thrive at work. So those couple of years that were really tough were also the time that I learned, okay, I want to continue building connections with people and I want to help them succeed at work. I can very clearly see the synchronous connection between the company's success and the person's success. I believe they have a lot to offer each other. And it's sort of an unlocking that can happen, right? The closest, might as well go back to school and learn some more things. So the closest official career for that was HR. So I got my SHRM certification. Okay. And Chris Leone, our my CEO, we kept in touch over the years. He tried to recruit me as a client success manager, as a marketer. And, I said, I love you and I love the company and I don't want that. I don't want to be in marketing. But he took a chance on me. I'm our first people person. We were at about 32 people when I joined, and we're knocking on the door of 50 now. So a lot of growth in a short period of time. And I get to build processes. I get to build connections between people. I get to help unlock that key between people thriving and the company thriving. And I'm having a lot of fun.
So how long have you been in HR now?
About 4 years.
4 years. Okay. Amazing. And you've said that you're the HR department of one, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Correct.
Okay. So I've got to ask you my most selfish question, because having spent most of my time in talent and things that I might refer to as the fun HR, anytime I've looked at head of HR roles at smaller companies, or even HR business partner roles, frankly, elsewhere, I think the one thing that I've held myself back more on it than not is the work or time one needs to spend in or around or with comp and benefits, employee relations, things like that. So I'm just curious, are you diving into those things as well as the department of one, or are you able to be pulling in, fractional support or other support in those areas?
Yeah, department of one.
Okay.
But I will say, I have the sort of phone a friend benefit. You mentioned our mutual connection, JD Slaughter. Yeah. I am lucky to know people who've been in this world a lot longer than I have, and I call them readily.
Yeah.
There's someone here in Richmond, Virginia, that I met early on getting my SHRM certification, and I think I called her once a month for the first year or so. And it felt like I was dealing with some sort of wild and crazy situation every month that year, So, I think as long as we're not too proud to lean on our resources, and not too proud to really, I was going to say Google, ask ChatGPT whatever you need to know, and then check your sources. Open up your old textbooks, then you can figure it out.
And like you said, SHRM is a great,
resource.
Yeah, great
100%.
resource, especially around some of those pieces that I'm, that I was even talking about. Cool. Mm-hmm. So let's dive into the 4-day work week. So you rolled it out 2 years ago. I think what I would love, and kind of what I'm thinking of here is, let's say there's business leaders or HR leaders listening today. I kind of want to take it from the beginning a bit here and say, where did the idea even spring up for you? How were the beginnings? How did you even start to dip a toe into the idea of a 4-day work week?
Yeah, great question. So, our CEO has never revealed to me who this employee is, but even predating me, we did employee engagement surveys. Mm-hmm. And someone wrote on the employee engagement survey one time, if you were CEO for a day, what would you do? 4-day work week.
Yeah.
And Chris kind of laughed at it, Then in early 2023, the results of that big pilot in the UK came out. 61 companies, incredible results. I think 53 of them stuck with the 4-day work week after that pilot. Mm-hmm. Surges in employee satisfaction and wellness, and also productivity. Most of the companies reported higher earnings than they had ever before. And the component that really piqued Chris's interest was this idea of the operational excellence that goes hand in hand with the 4-day work week. So not only is it an opportunity to give your folks a day of rest, which we all know is good for productivity in itself, you're also condensing your work down to 4 days, which requires more focus. It requires one of our core values, essentialism. It requires reviewing everything you do and asking, is this really necessary? Does this move the needle? Mm-hmm. Is this worth it? Looking at our processes. Is this the most efficient way to go about this? And it also happens that this is, we're rolling this out with the explosion of AI.
Yeah.
So in the digital marketing space, it's also how can we leverage AI
Mm-hmm.
to do our work faster and better, and then spend the human brain time on the higher quality, higher cognitive thinking components of our work.
Yeah. Cool.
So that was sort of the beginning of it. And I think he brought it up to me in January, and I was like, have you lost your mind? So he and I had many discussions. We started speaking with Joe O'Connor, who's the CEO of Work Time Reduction. And he was part of that initial pilot. And so his company now helps, but they're consultants. They help folks set this
Cool.
pilot up.
Yeah.
Yep. They help them find their own efficiencies and figure out if this is something that they can be successful in. So we had a lot of conversations with Joe. And then we timed it out so that we would do a quarter of, we did Q2 was, all right, this is the goal. Every department is in charge of finding these efficiencies and assessing the work that we do and asking, is it really essential?
Yeah.
Reviewing your meetings. Do they need to be this long? Could they be a little bit shorter? In preparation. And so then July 1st is when we rolled it out.
2023. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
2023.
All right. I want to pause you there because I don't want to,
Yeah.
because I want to get to your findings and how it's going. But let me, push us back to the beginning again for a second. So this was not a harebrained scheme of HR's coming to, this was your CEO brought it to you, having sort of read about the UK study. But I'd imagine the two of you, now, unless Gear is just small enough where CEO says, yes, you're on board and go, or was there some level of influence and storytelling and buy-in you had to seek first? And how did that go? How did you get people on board?
Yeah, great question. Certainly a level of buy-in needed to happen at the leadership level.
Okay.
We have a director of operations, director of accounts, director of digital marketing, who's in charge of product and business development. And everyone had their own set of concerns and hesitations. And, some folks are naturally more excited by change than others, and some folks are a little more cautious. So we had many discussions at the leadership level.
Can I make a couple of guesses just for fun?
Sure, go for it.
Marketing was very excited. Ooh, maybe not. Okay. Listen, we will. I'll let you pause to protect the innocent. Okay, don't worry about it. Sales maybe more concerned because the concern probably being, well, we need to be working when our customers are working, right? I'd imagine that's some level of concern there. I'll just stop there. Let me just pick on sales and marketing.
But sales and director of accounts for sure has valid concerns because the rest of the world is not on a 5-day work week. Our clients are not on a 5-day work week. Sales is going to pick up the phone when the phone rings.
Yeah.
And so we can get into a little bit more about how different folks leverage it.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. We can get into that a little bit more. Yeah. Cool. She's going to answer the phone when the phone rings. So.
Okay. But I totally interrupted you in talking about kind of the, I don't know what you'd want to call it, the road show you had to go on to sell this.
Yes. So getting buy-in at the leadership level was the first hurdle. Then you got to get all the managers on board. And I think once you get to individual contributors, they're cautiously excited. Right. And we have been remote since before my time. We have had a flexible schedule since before my time. Those have been tenets of Gear long before I arrived and long before we rolled out the 4-day work week. So we already have a really supportive, what I think is a very supportive culture for our employees.
Well, so what was, and maybe now is, and you tell me if it's better to come later, the answer to this question, or what is now versus what was, but what is the current company and in-office, I think you said hybrid already. So there was already sort of was there already any hard and fast, this many days in the office, this many not? Do you already have people who are permanently remote? Like, what's that mix?
Right. Yeah. Good question. So I guess we would have been hybrid prior to COVID, based in Richmond, Virginia.
Okay.
But even then, no in-office requirement.
Okay.
And then COVID hits, people move away.
Yeah.
I get here, I kind of say, can we turn off the filters? Can I search for people all over the country? And I get the go ahead to do that. And so now we have folks in 12, 13 different states, I believe.
Okay.
And we're about half outside of Richmond, half in Richmond.
Okay.
Still, no, we don't have an office. We do use a co-working space occasionally.
Okay. Did you have an office?
Way back when.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So very distributed.
Yes.
Very distributed. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's cool. I just think it's good context for anyone listening who's like, ooh, how do we do this? Just to hear, what that looked like for you. Okay. And then you said a couple other things. Again, I'm trying to keep my eye on. I want to get to like, what are all the learnings you've had along the way? How are things going? You said two things that I wanted to dig into. One is, let's start with AI, because I think that's such a hot issue right now. And let me rewind the clock here, right? So you were starting to talk about this in late 2022, right? Kind of got we're going to do this in January of 2023, right? And so if I think
that was more like January 2023 was the starting to dabble.
Thank you. Okay.
And dip our toes in, and then more like February, March, it's like, okay, let's do it. Yeah.
And if I think back to where I was at the time, right? I'm in talent at General Mills, and I think, they were looking at, to me, AI felt within the bounds of this Fortune 500 company. It felt like AI was very much in its sort of infancy and trying to figure out, I think policies were just starting to roll out around what you can and can't use ChatGPT for, like how to keep IP and customer information off of any external while we play around with it and figure out, are we going to have our own, internal GPT that's firewalled off from the world. And at that time, I feel like people were just barely dabbling with how to, from a job perspective, how to interact with AI, right? Fast forward to when I left my corporate gig in late 2024 and, now into 2025. And it's like, there's sort of this AI explosion happening, right? Where there's probably a bubble that's going to pop at some time of quote unquote AI experts who are selling their, of a 5-year-old technology that are selling their, services. But I'd have to talk to some former colleagues that are in these larger organizations to find out like what's life really like there right now. But at least from my vantage point, it's everywhere. And perhaps it's more the small business and entrepreneurial spaces that I'm primarily swimming in, where it feels like everybody's trying to use all the possible things and generative AI and agents and, all this stuff. So but you were already talking about in 2023, how can we use AI for, and I'm probably going to put words in your mouth a bit here, but I think what you were alluding to was, things that don't require as much human interaction, human creativity. Is there some way to automate? And my guess here is like some way to automate more routine stuff, or what was that? Because to me, when you said that, I was like, that sounds so ahead of the times, right? At that time. So I would just love to hear a little bit more about, were you ahead of the times and how were you using it then versus now?
Yeah, sure. Great question. And I'll say though, Kent, Chris, our CEO's, we work for a digital marketing firm. So already it's our job to know these things. Mm-hmm. He is very, forward looking. He wants to be on the cutting edge, and he is. So we were probably, but I will say he and I also had that bubble popping conversation just recently. So you're right there. You're with it.
Yeah.
But yes, so the way we were using it then, very different than the way we're using it now. And also cautious because we work with credit unions.
Hmm.
And we do not download or keep customer data ever,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
certainly had to formulate a policy that we were going to
Yeah,
really stick to our guns to about not uploading client data or client information.
So you can be really clear with your customers about kind of like
Sure.
we were doing at General Mills, like what we can and can't and what we aren't. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And even now, our CEO will say, I don't put any information about our clients in there, because just even when you say don't train on it, it's
You never
still
know.
feels slightly irresponsible, right?
Yeah.
But back then, I think it was really rudimentary, and where can we get sort of these small wins?
Yeah.
And now it's their entire tools.
Okay.
Our advertising team is looking into ways to automate some of their check-ins and things like that. We have our client success team is generating these custom GPTs that can help them answer any questions about. We also work with industrial manufacturers, so these really technical spaces that you have to have specialists to tell you what's up. You can develop feed information to these custom GPTs and then run reps, speaking with them and practicing with them, and then you learn too.
Okay.
We're talking too about creating a custom GPT for training our managers. These are our management philosophies at Gear. We believe in radical candor.
Nice.
We operate on EOS, and so giving it all the information we can about us, and then saying, here are 6 different scenarios that I want you to run. Here's the grading rubric. Go and give a really good specific piece of positive feedback, and then get your grade back, and do that 6 more times with 6 more different scenarios. So it is exciting, and I will say we had a strategic initiative, I believe last year, that was making AI as necessary as having an internet connection. And I think we've done that. I think we're there.
Wild. Okay.
Yeah.
If I'm not careful, we're going to keep diving into that, but it might come back up. Cause you also said essentialism, right? Like that has been a really important, right. And my, I don't know, amateurish understanding of essentialism from my perspective is even just pausing for a minute and saying, what's the most important thing I need to get done today so that I don't spin my wheels on lower value activity, right? Can I really focus on the most important things to do? And it sounds like that was part of the mandate right away for you all. And so what are some of the things that, right? Because you said focus and essentialism. So what are some of the things that you've had to be really ruthless about, right? No, we're not going to spend our time on that, right? I think a lot of companies, I know the conversation was in HR all the time, which is ruthlessly prioritizing, right? And I think one of the favorite things I've seen about HR lately and I've heard it before, has been put the list of things you're doing in HR and ask yourself, if we stop doing it, would the employee base notice?
Right.
But
that's a good one.
Maybe a bit of an aside. I apologize, but talk to me about like how you've been bringing, because it makes sense to me how important that would be for the 4-day work week, right? Focus and essentialism. So how have you been bringing that to life and keeping a focus on that?
Yeah, good question. And it has to be done at the organization level, at the department level, and at the individual level. And so it's different for all of those different levels. Organizationally, about that same time, we made a commitment internally to really stick with these 2 verticals that we've made a bunch of progress in. So, we don't need to take on any client that knocks on our door. We're going to stick with these 2 verticals because we're really good at them. Something else Chris says all the time is we don't want to, I can't remember how he says it. Basically, you don't want to be known for what you're worst at. So don't take on, if we're not
being mediocre across a million things versus excellent at a couple of things.
Exactly. So committing to excellence in our verticals was something we did at the organizational level.
Cool.
I think a lot of it at the department level, specifically for me in HR, and I think you nailed it with the sign on the wall. Acknowledge that every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else.
Mm-hmm.
So weigh this yes that you're saying now against something that's probably going to come along here in a little bit. And are you comfortable with that being a no? Because they can't both be yeses and you do them well with excellence. Something else, this one, also I strive for all the time. What is the minimum viable product for this? What's its simplest version? Because also often that's the easiest for people to use and implement. So keep it simple.
Yeah.
As simple as you possibly can.
Okay. I feel like I might have sidetracked us for far too long, and I apologize for that because you just said some things that really popped for me. So you started to roll it out. You had to do this road show and had to start having conversation around, focus, essentialism, how you're using AI. I don't know where that brings us to in the timeline from 2023, but I'd love to hear more of the journey.
Sure. And, I think something that's interesting, people might not be aware of, that there are several different models of the 4-day work week that different folks roll out. So I can tell you a little bit about the one we chose and why, and, laying out expectations and things like that. Because that was a huge part of getting everybody on board, is being sure we're clear on expectations. Mm-hmm. And continuing to clarify those. We just revised them again last month. So we are on the 180-100 model of the 4-day work week, which means we do 100% of the work, impact and output, not necessarily tasks, and 80% of the time for 100% of the pay. So this is not a consolidated, people always ask, is it 10 fours? No, it's not. We have reduced the time we are spending on work. We've reduced the time we're spending doing client work on billable hours. And so that's where it really comes in. You got to be doing the things that drive the largest impact. We also decided, instead of doing staggered days off, we would do a universal day off. So we do Fridays off. However, Friday is not a weekend day. Okay. It's not a Saturday. It's not a Sunday. So if you're going to be completely out of pocket and unavailable, you still have to put in your PTO, which we have unlimited PTO. So it's okay.
It's more communication at that point then.
It's communication. Yeah. It's the communication and being sure we have coverage in place. So if you're going to be out of pocket completely, treat it like a day off. Be sure you've got coverage. Communicate to everybody in your pod and on your team that that's what's going on and this is your coverage. Otherwise, if you're a client-facing person, you're expected to check your email 3 times, once in the morning, once in the middle of the day, and once in the afternoon. And if you're a project manager or if you're on the production side, you're supposed to check Slack 3 times a day. So the idea is, if a client comes in with something urgent, the client success manager visits the urgency tree to determine, is this something that needs to be done right now? And if it is, they send the Slack to the internal teams that need to know, and it can be done by the end of that day. So we have that system in place for capturing those urgent tasks. We just did a sort of follow-up survey, and it's not, I don't think that the urgent tasks are coming in all that often. I think it's more about preparing for the next week.
Yeah.
That people are wanting to do,
Okay, so I have a couple questions because I want to make sure I understood the language, because I think I got a little lost in the language on the 80-100 part. Okay. So tell me if I'm understanding or not. So we didn't say you're now working 4 10s. You're working 4 regular days, 8s, yep. Or whatever for a whatever a salaried level person's expectations would be. And if you're out, let us know. But otherwise, we're expecting some level of presence in order to handle urgent things, particularly my guess is customer needs on a Friday. So let me pause there. Am I following?
That's correct. Okay. Yes.
So then in my mind, if I can just play it out as like, if I was working that way, what would that mean for me on a Friday? On a Friday, that would mean for me, I can mow my lawn. Mm-hmm. I can maybe get, instead of what the weekend can tend to be for adults, and even separate that out a little bit for parents as well, which is jamming everything you didn't have time for in the week. So plowing through, laundry for 1 to 5 or 6 humans, yard work, housework, other errands one needs to run, instead of jamming that into Saturday and Sunday, maybe Friday, because I know I need to check my email a few times during the day. I'm going to do some stuff around the house that relieves some pressure from my weekend, mow the lawn, do some laundry, maybe some house projects where I can still check my email. If something urgent comes up, great. I'm going to drop and take care of what needs to get taken care of. But kind of making it so that it's almost helping you maximize the weekend than, say, quote unquote, only working 4 days.
That's so perceptive.
Okay.
That's spot on.
That's really cool. Okay.
That's
cool.
what it is, for sure. And another thing, something that I certainly use it for, and I think others do as well, is it's deep work time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, I get the kids off
no meetings
school,
allowed. Yeah.
no meetings, and nobody slacks me for the most part, right? So, in HR, you got things coming at you all day. There's really not good deep work time
For HR
in the workday, Monday through Thursday. So, these projects that are very important to me and that I want to move forward, that I used to have to spend maybe Sunday night or a weeknight on.
Mm-hmm.
I get the kids off to school. I get to go to yoga, and then I come sit down for 2 hours and lock in.
Yeah.
And there's something, there's like the pressure is released, so your brain is even more open for creative thinking. So you hit it spot on. That's what it is.
That's really cool. That's not at all what I was expecting to hear, right? I was expecting to hear like a 4-10, which I know you said there's other models for it, which I don't think, perhaps I'll have to have you come back on for 4-day work week number 2 day. But that sounds really cool. It sounds really cool and doable. Mm. But to your point, if you're not going to extend to 4-10s, then now I can see, even with 4-10s, I can see it, but I can see it even more how important essentialism is. How do we reduce low value time spent or low value activity from being done?
Well, and the human brain is not capable of focusing for 10 hours at a time. No. Frankly, not 8 either, right? Yeah. So the work that you're going to get...
Hardly for more than 60 to 90 minutes at a time, but...
Sure. And also the work's going to expand to fill the time that you give it.
Yeah.
So...
All right, let me box us in a little bit, because I'm trying to want to watch the time, but I think you and I are going to have to debrief and frame up conversation number 2, which I'm not going to make you publicly agree to on the air. So results. I'd love to hear about, how are things going?
Yeah, great. So to tell you about results, I think I need to tell you about what we've measured. So the metrics that we've kept track of since the beginning of this, and that is time spent on tasks, and then lots of lagging metrics. So our NPS, our NBS, and then all of our revenue goals and all of our revenue metrics, and then finally our ENPS, our employee satisfaction. So I have data from basically every 3 months for that first year and a half.
Yeah, cool.
And so for that first year and a half, productivity stayed the same. Time spent on tasks decreased. NPS stayed the same. NBS stayed the same. We hit all of our revenue goals, and our ENPS surged. We were at about 50 in July of 23, and we got all the way up to like 85.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but you have to know, and we had talked about this going in, that the novelty of that's going to wear off, first of all, right? Second of all, it takes continuous upkeep. I mean, we've had 20 folks join since then, since that time. So, and those folks weren't here prior to the 4-day work week. So really kind of indoctrinating them into, this is how we're doing things now. Also, they usually, haven't experienced this at other places. So coming in and knowing, all right, this is a place where I really need to buckle down and get my work done, but I'll be rewarded for it if I do that. So really the first 18 months, everything was incredible. Great results.
Can I ask
We
about
just got,
one result really
sure.
quick?
Yeah.
Okay, so you
No,
were just
that's all
saying you
right.
got some new data that you're looking at.
Yes. Yes. So we just got some new data last quarter. And generally speaking, this data says, most people, about 25%, work a little bit at least one Friday a month. Another 22% work at least a little bit 2 Fridays a month. And then another 22% say, I choose to work some on Fridays because I use that flexibility elsewhere in my week. So, especially folks with kids in school where you're gonna want that uninterrupted time, but you
Yeah.
can also take off at 3 and go get your kids. So it's that level of flexibility that we've introduced that I think people have really come to appreciate and rely on. And that's the value that they see in it. That and
Okay.
what I mentioned earlier, which is that heads down, focused time where people aren't pinging you and you don't have any meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So, yeah, like you said, maybe kids' school starts at 8, so I'm not
Yep.
going to be like online until, or like
Nine.
my kids' middle school doesn't start until 9:30, right? Doors open at 9:15,
Wow.
right? So like, I might be online from 8 to 9, and then I'm going to be off from 9 to 9:30 ish, and I'm going to be back
Yeah.
on at 9. So maybe I'll
Yep.
flex. I mean, that's a hardly any time away, but I'll flex
Yeah.
some of that time by working a little bit on Friday, and that's
Right.
acceptable, with the exception of, right. And I'd imagine. So here's a question for you: is how much do you have to reinforce and guard against scheduling meetings on Friday? Because I'd imagine
Great
it's
question.
so tempting.
Yes, it's a great question. And it is tempting. And it's something we just reinforce. So we had that survey last quarter, and really one of the biggest findings was people aren't totally clear on the expectation. So we revisited the expectations we wrote at the beginning. We tweaked them a little bit so that they reflected how we actually are operating. We reiterated them to the managers. We sent them out with the survey results, and then I'm actually going to have everybody sign a copy. They don't know that yet. Everybody's going to sign a copy from our HRIS so that they acknowledge that they know what the expectations are. And those are Friday meetings are a last resort. For example, our client-facing team can do all they can to avoid client meetings on Fridays, but sometimes you just can't.
Right.
And so they'll take them.
Yeah.
And then there are certain weeks, for example, next week we have our biannual in-person retreat. So we fly everybody into Richmond. It makes for a very short working week as far as task work and client meetings and things go. So occasionally on weeks like that, there might be a meeting that pops up on a Friday, but it should be an absolute last resort, and it can be very tempting.
It should be the exception and not the
correct.
rule. Yeah.
Correct.
So, well, let me ask a question about that, and then if you can come back to it, because the thing that with all of the, so I think over the last couple of years, organizations have been pushing more to get people back in offices. I know, Gear is primarily a distributed and virtual, so I get that, but the parallel that's in my head is, especially as organizations are, there was a big push this spring, right? I think this was probably the biggest push all at once. And I get it. Some companies just built their office right before the pandemic hit. And, or even, Gender Mills where I worked. This is not something they said, but they have a huge plot of land, a lot of green grass that they're watering and keeping nice and paying groundskeepers for, and a giant building that in Minnesota you have to keep pipes from freezing, right? So they're having to heat and cool this giant building. Right? I get from a nuts and bolts perspective that we've got to get people into the office, right? And but what I've seen happen, and I'm gonna get back to Gear, I promise. We're getting there. We're going around the cul-de-sac a little.
Yeah.
Right. But part of why I think so many companies had to push for, with the million reasons, but a big thing I've seen time and time again is we have a really hard time managing by exception. And so therefore we have to put blanket rules in place and say everyone's coming back this many days, because so many companies tried to have policies that didn't have teeth in them. And
Mm-hmm.
what it comes down to, and this is where I'm getting to my question for you, which is this. I would imagine, and the company's small enough, so take this with a grain of salt, but I'd imagine this comes down to managers managing their people and paying attention to performance and having radically candid, as you were saying, radical candor, and having conversations about, perhaps not spending any time on work on Fridays isn't working for you. How do we,
Mm-hmm.
how do we do that? Right. So I think that's the thing that popped in my head is like, how much are you needing to manage your managers, frankly, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
hold them to the high expectation of how they're managing their people and holding them to these expectations.
Right. No,
Thank you
that's
for
a great
coming on
point.
that really long journey with me.
It was fun. It was great.
Okay.
It was so good. No, that's a great point. And something else I was going to say that surfaced in that survey is that people want to be clear how much they value the autonomy that they have. So I think what we're striving for and what we try to train our managers to be on the lookout for is, it's we still track hours because we have to be sure we're paying attention to utilization and capacity and knowing when we need to hire someone. But really, you're keeping tabs on the outputs, right? It's high autonomy, high flexibility, high trust, and high expectations. So the outputs need to be there. You need to be asking about them. Expectations don't change either, right? So just because we're working one fewer day in the week doesn't mean that you're not expected to get this internal project done that you signed up for and are excited to do. Now, we are perfectly reasonable, and there are times when the client work is rolling in at a pace that everybody's just really trying to stay afloat. And at those times, yeah, put that internal project on the back burner. But for the most part, we expect everybody to, contribute not only to their everyday work in those client projects, but also we're a really fast growing digital marketing agency. And so it's everybody's job to stay on the forefront of what we can provide for our clients to be sure they're getting what they need,
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I'd imagine, especially with the size, right? And I think what you said, if I can put in, maybe make sure I'm following, is, and I knew this from when I was in a consultancy, right? Like, profit's not a dirty word. It's what keeps the lights on. It's what pays everybody's paychecks. And so perhaps that's part of the prioritization and essentialism is like, is this in service of a client project? Is this in service of revenue generating work? And if
Correct.
not, that is probably something to be weighing, does that
Right.
fall farther down the list of priorities then?
Right. Yeah. If it's for fun, maybe that's a Friday thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
if it's not something that's gonna drive results.
Yeah.
So
Cool. Uh, Fun. There's so many other questions I could dig into, but what a really cool story. So before I give us a violent shove into the advice column, sounds like things are going great. Results are looking great, and there is no plan to adjust. But from what I'm hearing, is you need to keep an eye on what you're measuring. It's like
yeah.
measure what gets measured gets managed, right? So if you're not,
Right.
make sure you know what
Yeah.
you're measuring so that you can. And it sounds like you've multiple times in the last couple of years had to sort of reinforce what the
Mhm.
expectations are, and even adjust the expectations because we had to. You've been learning as you've. It's not like you've
Yeah.
implemented this at 4 other companies, right? So you've, you
Right.
know,
No. Yeah.
yeah.
Right. And what else I'll say is that this is not this doesn't make us immune to every other issue that companies face, right? Actually, I think Joe O'Connor said, and maybe it's not Joe, but I'll attribute it to him anyway. He said the 4-day work week doesn't solve problems, it surfaces them.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh,
when
yeah.
we, when that sort of efficiency is falling to the wayside, when we have processes that are far too complicated, or when we're getting outside of our core niche areas, it shows faster because there's less time to be working on that stuff. So we're constantly working on that. I mean, we have plans at our retreat next week
Mm-hmm.
to buckle down into our pods and figure out what can be discarded or changed to keep us
Yeah.
moving at this pace. And so I'll also say, transparently, our ENPS dipped at the beginning of this year, but so did everyone else's. and
Yes.
and that is not, our CEO will tell you, I do not rest on that as an excuse. I'm constantly looking for, okay, what can we be doing better? What are our people saying? How do we need to address that? So it's not a silver bullet, and it doesn't make you immune to all the other waves that are crashing down.
Cool. Yeah. So the space that I primarily play in, right, is executive coaching, leadership development. So I would imagine you don't need to say a word when I say this, but I would imagine, right, like people who are excellent at leading and people who are struggling at leading, to your point that you're attributing to Joe O'Connor, it becomes very obvious, right,
Mm-hmm.
with how things are condensed and the need to really have sort of be vigilant for essentialism, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, there's less time to hide in.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I always ask everybody to come with 2 pieces of advice and a grab bag. So the first is, what's your, and it could be related to this. It could be something else that's just pulled your focus lately
Sure.
too, which is, what's one piece of advice you have for any people leaders who are listening today?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is advice, but it is my personal sort of people operations philosophy. And I stole it from, I originally saw it in Danny Meyer's book, Setting the Table. I think it's also like a Ritz-Carlton sort of radical hospitality theory, which is that of the virtuous cycle. And essentially it's, if you're taking care of your people, they'll take care of your business.
Mm-hmm.
And taking care of, and you're going to think that this is funny to say on an episode about the 4-day work week, taking care of your people doesn't mean throwing perks at them. It means treating them like people,
Mm-hmm.
not cogs. It means giving them autonomy and trust and flexibility and the ability to bring their whole focused, concentrated selves to work because you've given them time for rest and time with their families and time to catch up around the house and things they need to do. And I think, and also just, this is not really related to 4-day work week, but respecting them as creators and as relationship builders themselves. This part resonates with me, the Ritz-Carlton. It's, I think their mission is still, we're ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. So treating your people like the subject matter experts that they are, and they'll be more than willing to take care of your clients for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So what's your advice for those who support leaders out there?
This is definitely not advice, because this is something that I just tell myself all the time. This is like something I'm working on for myself this year. So I'll just share it with you in case it resonates for somebody else. But create systems and framework that enable and empower your managers to lead. So I have a habit of over buffering, and I have a habit of being the bridge instead of building the bridge. But that's not scalable, and it doesn't teach anybody anything. So, for example, working on adjusting our annual reviews this year, our 360 reviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to make them more frequent. I want to make them simpler, just to build that radical candor muscle in our people. And there was a lot of concern at the leadership level that this is going to be a huge administrative burden. It's not going to work well if it's something that I'm just taking on and reaching out to people and nagging them and tapping them on the shoulder to do it. So what it needs to become is part of managers' KPIs. And so their managers need to be saying, hey, how'd your quarterly conversations go this quarter? What's your feedback score on, the custom GPT that we built? Can you show me a few of the examples? So putting it back on people so that they're developing and they're learning and they're figuring it out on their own, and you're not building yourself into these systems.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I say about with leaders, it resonates with just leaders coaching, right? Is yeah, sure, you can roll up your sleeves and just jump in there and do it, but are you then building capability? And are people learning how to do it when you're not there, right? I love that. So, and what's your grab bag item for today?
Yeah, my grab bag is a very 4-day work week focus, and it's just don't be afraid to experiment.
Yeah.
I think we're afraid to play, especially in HR. We're afraid to play. We're nervous. But I think our CEO is a really good example of this. Initially he said, no way, we're not doing that. And then was not afraid to say, all right, let's give it a try, and adjust accordingly. I mentioned earlier about, he's super excited about AI, has been from the very beginning, and isn't afraid to say, actually, you know what? I do think there's a bubble coming. And, I do think that we're saying some sort of reckless and dangerous things about AI that just aren't true. So I'm going to amend what I said earlier. And it encourages other people to experiment, and it encourages people to, not be afraid to try something that might have them fall on their face, but at least they tried.
Yeah. Love that. Yeah, you got to build in that risk tolerance so that it's such a catchphrase perhaps, but the fail forward mentality of
Right.
we shouldn't be so dug in as to not adjust or do a 180 because it's not working, right?
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Morgan, thank you so much for coming on today. This was perhaps way too much fun for me. So hopefully you enjoyed it as well. And I think our listeners and those who are sort of 4-day work week curious will get a lot from this. And so I just really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast today.
Thanks, Kent. I had a great time.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.